Here we go. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Climate Show on the Postman 24. The climate crisis is one of the most important and unprecedented issues in the world, threatening millions of people's lives, homes and jobs. Our live stream interviews with climate leaders can be watched on the postman24.com, as well as on our Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn and Instagram, so turn on your notifications on your preferred platform. For today's episode, I'm your host, Bertie and we're going to be talking about the climate impact of travel and tourism, a sector that has grown massively in recent decades. In 2018, there were over 50 times as many international tourists as there were in 1950, with a staggering 1.4 billion international arrivals. While the travel and tourism sector took a hit with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's still predicted to grow and is a huge part of the global economy, as well as a huge driver of the climate crisis, responsible for between 5 and 8% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Tourism has to change to protect the planet, and we have the perfect guest today to discuss how we can do this, Professor Geoffrey Lipman, President of the Green Growth Travelism Institute and of the International Coalition of Tourism Partners. Previously to this, he was Executive Director of the International Air Transport Association in the 1970s, the first President of the World Travel and Tourism Council in the 90s, Assistant Secretary General of the UN World Tourism Organization in the noughties, and much more that I haven't got time to list in full here. Geoffrey, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's just a guy who couldn't hold down a steady job.
So I wondered to start us off if you could kind of broadly outline the different environmental and climate impacts of the tourism and travel industry.
Well, I guess you put it down to two main impacts in terms of climate. The first one is obviously, and you mentioned it produces carbon dioxide, and it's not a massive contributor when you think about it. You know, cities, concrete producers, many other things in the world are significantly more than 5 to 8%, but it is 5 to 8%. And then there's a second component which isn't talked about very much, and it mostly comes from aviation. Carbon dioxide is about 75% of the greenhouse gases which are heating the atmosphere, but the other 25% are made up of different compounds of nitrogen and sulfur and methane, and a lot of that, certainly in the upper atmosphere where it can do the most damage, comes from aviation. So these are the two broad impacts, and then of course there's the within this 5 to 8%, the different elements. Hotels have certain energy, carbon dioxide producing. Rent-a-cars have the classic problem of using fossil fuel. And it's fairly, like most things in travel and tourism, it kind of cross-cuts across different aspects of society. So where you have a climate impact of a city, a lot of travel and tourism goes to cities. So you'll see it buried in the city component. It's significant, and the world has a very serious problem, as you know, with this problem. If we don't control our greenhouse gases over the next couple of decades, we're going to have increasingly, this is what plays out for the most part, and this is why it's so important for tourism. It affects weather. The changing climate affects our weather and unpredictable weather patterns. We know to be hot in certain places, and tourism flows go to those locations. People have been able to know when they're getting Caribbean storms. It's been, quite reliable. That reliability is changing, and the challenges are becoming more severe, more intense, and more unpredictable. And it, as the line continues to grow of increasing temperature, you put a blanket around the world. Inside the blanket, all these atmospheric controls of weather are shifting and shifting much more dynamically. And if we cannot rates as we have been doing for the past years, then this is going to become so much more severe, much worse heat waves and forest fires, much more storms and floods, and tourism being dependent on predictable weather. So in a certain sense, changing weather affects everybody. It's going to change tourism patterns more than anybody else.
Yeah, so we've got kind of two elements there, haven't we? We've got the contribution towards the climate crisis that travel makes, and also the change of the industry that will result from natural weather disasters and etc. in climate and kind of tourist destinations.
Absolutely.
So regarding kind of the first of those to begin with, you work with several organisations that promote a kind of greener view of travel. So what does kind of climate friendly travel look like, and how much of that is achievable already, and what requires kind of larger scale change?
Climate friendly travel, which is a concept that we developed at SUNx Malta, which is the small NGO that I'm running for the past few years, partnered with the government. We defined and created the concept of climate friendly travel. We did it for reasons. The first reason is we want this industry to actually be climate friendly. There's a sort of almost marketing dimension to the expression climate friendly travel. And then there's a sort of what I'll call the conceptual side. It has to be, that's point number one. Point number two, it has to respond to the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, they were set out in 2015 at the same time as the Paris Climate Agreement was negotiated. But they basically deal with every facet of life, human life on the planet. So anything related to sustainability is encapsulated by the Sustainable Development Goals. And then the second and most significant component, it has for the Paris 1.5 degree maximum temperature increase. When they had the Paris Agreement in 2015, they actually said that we must hold temperatures to 2 degrees above some long-term industrialized level, to 2 degrees. But in the last 5 years, everything shifted to 1.5 degrees. 2 degrees is out of the window. And according to the latest statistics from the IPCC, which is the UN Climate Scientist Agency, we've already used 1.2 degrees of the allotted 1.5. So, you know, we're on a very steep growth curve, and we have to change it. And climate-friendly travel is designed to help the communities face up to this new reality, and then to take the necessary actions. And that's a very important part of what we are trying to advocate. It's not just making a declaration that we want to be climate friendly, it's putting in place a system that will help travel and tourism companies, first of all, assess what their climate impact is and their sustainability impact, then make plans to deal with it. And then we have a group of young people who are there as kind of virtual interns to help and support them do this.
That's
and
great.
we have a very ambitious goal. I mean, if the travel and tourism sector, like the whole of humanity, has to change. So it's not just a question of saying, well, we want it to change in Bangladesh, or we want it to change it has to change everywhere, because travel and tourism has to get rid of that 5 to 8% by 2050 completely.
And I think I'm right in thinking that one of the aims of SUNx in trying to do this is to come up with a way to measure the climate impact of travel. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you go about making that measurement?
Well, yeah, I mean, we have a focus on measurement, but we don't try to make that assessment. I mean, the climate scientists are making the broad assessments, and they set standards. Try to do is to create a system which brings the standards from the climate world, the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Climate. They have standards, and we are trying to bring that into another goldfish bowl, if you like, which is the travel and tourism world, which doesn't measure its emissions. And so we created a registry. We did this with the government of Malta, which they had a shipping registry for many, many years. You may recall that. It's a global registry, and that gave us the idea of saying, why don't we have a climate-friendly travel registry? So what we did was we built a data, I guess it's a platform. We built a platform that would allow travel and tourism companies to measure their own emissions, and communities to measure their own emissions using the UN criteria and filing them on our platform, which is then aligned with the UN criteria. So we're acting as a translation element between this very serious science-based measurements, which the climate world does, and the much less knowledgeable world of travel and tourism, who haven't been used to measuring their carbon emissions. The actual specifics of the measurements are decided by the climate people. We just translate them.
And
it's not very honest with you. I've described it as creating a kind of telephone book, you know, and nobody says, wow, how do you create the telephone book? And we don't have telephone books anymore because it's a computer. But, you know, it's basically each company and each community has its own reality. You can have two cities which are next to each other, and their carbon emission profile will be quite different. The greenhouse gas emission profile will be quite different. In our vision, they have to measure that themselves, and we've set up a system that allows that measurement to be brought together in a coherent and compatible with the UN, you know, scientist stuff, and put it in language which we think is a little bit understandable, and then they file that, and we put it into the UN system. We have an agreement with the UN, and that way the travel and tourism industry becomes embedded with everybody else who's doing this kind of thing.
Sorry, I think I might have just lost you. Are you still on the line? Oh, yeah. I was going to say, I mean,
here. Can you hear me? I can.
You're breaking up a little bit, but I think we've still got you. I was going to say, I mean, as soon as you get to kind of this world of measurement, we're interacting with carbon accountancy, aren't we? And a lot of airlines are already kind of claiming to be carbon neutral, or claiming that they're offsetting their emissions. But numerous investigations, including kind of a big one by The Guardian and Unearthed a little while ago, have revealed that many of the major airlines' claims about offsetting are unverified, or even just kind of outright lies. So like EasyJet, British Airways, United Airlines, Ryanair, many others have been credibly accused of greenwashing now. So when you're encouraging people to measure their kind of carbon impact, the climate impact in a travel context, how do they navigate this? And do you think we can reform this kind of offsetting stuff, or is it just not the way forward?
No, I don't think we and our NGO is going to reform something as well established and well. You know, I spent 20 years at IATA. I know just how airline system is. It's built on standards which have been developed over 50 years between the governments and the airlines, bilaterally and regionally within the European Union, for example, and then globally. So it's a very complicated system. And within that system, there are elements which are pushing the airline to report more accurately, more seriously. The International Civil Aviation Organization has established standards for this. Individual companies are using things like the Global Compact or the science-based targets, and those people have mechanisms for making people more honest. Our registry, we think, will help because people publish information, and if anybody wants to see it, it will be there for them to see. I don't think there's going to be a sort of compliance mechanism that anybody's going to put in place. I think there's a reporting system, and eventually travel and tourism companies, airlines specifically, will become a part of it, just like they report so many other pieces. The key around aviation is the use of fossil fuel, and they have to be able, in the course of the next 10 years, to eliminate their reliance on fossil fuel, and they have to be able to use a kind of, initially a kind of fuel, which they call SAF, which stands for Sustainable Aviation Fuel, which produces much less carbon. And then by the mid-30s, you hear people like Airbus are developing different for driving craft, which have, and then lots of local stuff. People are talking about electric aircraft. People are shifting from aviation to travel on high-speed trains. I think we're going to see that evolve over the next 10 to 15 years. And it's not going to be driven by compliance. Passengers and politicians realize that climate change is incredibly serious, and we have to make this transformation. And the airlines and other groups who've been kind of, sort of hard, in a lobbying sense, which every industry does, they're going to have to fall into line by 2030.
So are you feeling optimistic about the kind of techno-futurist solutions to airlines then, stuff like biofuel, solar-powered planes, this kind of thing? I know that...
I'm optimistic in the technology development because really, there was a great development. I don't know if they're still doing it, but British Airways had a system at London City Airport where they were taking household waste and they were putting it through a process, a chemical process, which turned it into sustainable aviation fuel. And that solves two problems: the waste problem. It's a virtuous circle. Solves the waste problem, and you could have those kind of platforms around. And there are companies I see now every month. A new company is setting up to manufacture sustainable aviation fuel. Lots of the reason why it hasn't evolved has been fossil fuel companies, and the airlines have had a kind of, I'd say, a cozy relationship, but it's a kind of dance of death more than anything else. The airlines say, yes, we want to have sustainable aviation fuel, but it's too expensive. And the fossil fuel companies say, well, aviation is only a small part of the total fuel mix, so we can't afford to make it any cheaper. And this is crazy. This is two massive groups of leading industrial activities who are, pushing each other to the highest common factor rather than pushing each other down to the lowest common denominator. It should be able to be produced as cheaply as fossil fuel, and because of the drive of governments to bring these big carbon emissions under control, it will eventually find the fossil fuel is being taxed to such a level it becomes much more attractive to produce the clean stuff. It's not. I don't think it's a complex situation. It's just cutting through and having the industry fuel suppliers or make the moves. And I'm optimistic to answer after that long diatribe. To answer your question, I'm optimistic, but I don't think it's going to happen because the people necessarily believe in this. I think it's going to happen with a combination of pressure from young people. I have total belief that the young people will push us in the right direction. I'm a strong supporter of the kind of mindset that they have on this, and governments are beginning to understand when they see the floods in New York City, when they turn on the television and they see forest fires burning all across California or Australia or the floods in Europe this year. I think people realize that this is real and we have to do something about it. So I think that combination of pressure from the next generation and government regulation and an industry which is not stupid will make that switch. Yeah.
And I mean, when you talk about pressure from young people, is that do you think that's more in terms of where we're putting our money or kind of lobbying and protesting and stuff like this? Because I think often kind of conversations about flights and their emissions lead into this kind of we need to change our lifestyles at an individualistic level kind of conversations about climate change, but we know that 100 companies are responsible for 70% of greenhouse gas emissions, etc., etc.
And 10% of those are from the travel and tourism sector. But I was looking at some figures today, and I think there are about 5 airline companies, 1 railway company, 1 big hotel company, and part of that top 100 emitters. So yeah, I mean, the young people have a different mindset than certainly my generation, but your generation too. They learn about the climate issues at school and sustainability issues. They do have an Earth Day at school, and I think I think they have a better morality than the older people. I have a daughter who lectures me all the time, and she makes a lot of sense. And do you really need to pay? I go to the airport in Brussels and I see a sign, and I'm not going to say which airline, anywhere in Europe for 15 euros. And I just paid 60 euros for the taxi to get me home to the airport. There's something crazy about this. Aviation fuel isn't taxed. Used to say that's great. Let's see how long we can keep that. But does it make any sense in a world where it's responsible for 5% of the carbon emissions?
So this is all really interesting stuff.
Changing, Bertie. I mean,
sorry, I think there's a bit of a lag.
You asked the question before. It's okay. You asked the question before about am I optimistic, and I am optimistic because it's getting worse, and I'm not so optimistic about our capacity to deal with the short term. I think we'll manage to deal with the long term, the reducing carbon to greenhouse gas to zero by 50. Currently, they're talking about net carbon reduction by 2050. At SUNx Malta, we've said that's just not good enough. It should, if you want to go for the net carbon, fine, but bring it to 2030, and by 2050, you don't have any greenhouse gas around. That should be long enough. And I think if you have those kind of pressures coming from the regulators, you see it in the EU with the Fit for 55 package. I mean, this is, they're conscious of the need to do some serious things. And then you have young people with a stronger conscience and who are prepared to do things like the flight share movement. Obviously, as an industry person, I'm not, a big fan of people saying we won't fly, but I personally believe if the industry can't meet the climate requirements, it shouldn't be there.
So last question before we go. Obviously COP26 is coming up this autumn in the UK. There's a lot of hype around it, at least there is in this country. What would you like to see coming from the conference related to the travel sector? How are you feeling about that?
Well, there is an initiative. It's actually going to be made formal tomorrow. Declaration. We're good. The first climate declaration was in Gerber in 2003, and then I was heavily involved in one called the Davos Declaration in 2007, and now we have a new one coming up, which aligns itself very much to this race for zero, which the UK has introduced as its kind of flagship initiative for the COP26. And I think it's a step in the right direction that the industry has another declaration. But what we're arguing is we're calling for a dash to zero, not a race to zero. And in our dash to zero, we want to see the 2050 targets to 2030, net zero carbon in 2030, and we want no greenhouse gases by 2050. Will that happen at the COP meeting? Probably not, but then there's another COP meeting next year, and one after that, so eventually it will happen.
Well, fingers crossed and good luck with it, and thanks so much for talking with us today. Really appreciate it.
No, it's a pleasure. Nice to meet you, Bertie. We should talk again sometime.
No, for sure. I'd like that. Goodbye then.
Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.
Thanks to you too. Bye.